So this no, one is zero, three. That's the here. Accept and maintaining me for me. The type of clothes is true. This morning, we have with us, um, sure you Bradley, who many of you know, and to preserve my voice, um, his his practice mate, um, um, Yushin, uh, Yushin Bernal. There we go. Yushin Bernal will introduce him. Thank you, and welcome to all of you who are here. Wow, we got a crowd. Pleasure to be here and for your practice. Uh, yeah, thank you. You need to speak up. Oh, louder? Okay, maybe that's better. Chorio Bradley was ordained as a Soto priest in 2002 by Serene Barbara Coe. I hope my English is good. um, at Austin Zen Center. In 2004, he moved to Bloomington, Indiana to study with Shuhaku Okumura Roshi and Sanshin Zen community. He also trained at Tasahara Zen Mountain Center. Um, he also made some angles in Japan and the United States. And in 2010, Shoryu received Dharma transmission from Roshi. And he has lived and practiced at Cubic Studio since founding it in December 2011. Well, thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate it. Introducing me, Ryushin. I always admire people who can speak in a different language, and Ryushin is even understanding jokes better and better in English. So we have some technical. I'd like to turn the indoor speaker up a little bit because I can't hear it. Um, it's on the speaker. There's a little, yes, yeah. Hopefully that'll do it. Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, it's good to be back. It's Cedar Rapids Zen Center. So I always say this when I come here. It feels like I'm coming home again to a certain degree. So it feels very familiar and always feel so welcome here. And it's lovely to see spring starting to spring here a little bit. I think we're a little bit further along down in Arkansas, but it's another cool thing to see all the friends, the trees, my friends that I've made here, uh, starting to bloom and coming back to life. So, and all my other Dharma friends too. It's great to see you. So today, I was going to speak on the seventh major precepts. So, of course, we take 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And I've been doing this here for a few years, just speaking on a different precept each time I come. So today it's the seventh major precept. And that is, it goes something like we don't disparage others, or we don't praise ourselves and disparage others, or disparage others and praise ourselves at others' expense. So, um, I've been talking about these precepts or studying them for several years now, and it's a very, deep and endless practice. So, just I think most of us are familiar with these 16 Bodhisattva precepts, but we call them the Bodhisattva precepts because they help us practice with realizing this reality that we all live in, that we all vow to express, that that reality is our connection to everybody and everything in this universe, while at the same time expressing our own individual responsibility. So, our vow is to live our life in such a way that we express this universal reality of interconnection with others, while at the same time expressing our own individual responsibility and fulfilling our own potential as a bodhisattva. So these two kind of seemingly contradictory aspects of reality, is a kind of koan for us, of course, of how to express this universal reality while at the same time completely manifesting our potential as an individual. So I look at these precepts as sort of a different way of looking at reality. Each one of them, a sort of different aspect of reality that we can practice with, or a different view of reality that we can take. And each one of these precepts, to me, encompasses all of the rest, and all of them are included um, in totality when we practice with one of them. But today, of course, we know that we have, as I said, 16 precepts. We take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We have three pure precepts, and then we have these 10 major precepts that talk about, some more specific things in our relationships with other beings. So, so when I study these precepts, I usually like to take a look at their origins, and it helps us to understand a little bit where, what they're expressing. I think where the origins are in the early texts of Buddhism, plus the later text in Mahayana Buddhism. And so I did this with my teacher. He always kind of took this approach. And so it's an interesting way, I think, and a helpful way to study precepts. So usually I talk a little bit about the Pali text, and then um, Bodhidharma's one mind precepts, which are attributed, to Bodhidharma, of course. And then Boman Kyo, or the Brahmanet Sutra, is also another important source of precepts. And of course, Dogen Zenji's commentary on these precepts too. So we'll take a look at that. Um, so the early text that I looked at sort of the Theravadan Vinaya, and there's several different versions of the precepts that the early Sangha took, but I couldn't, there's not one that exactly relates to this or exactly expresses the same thing, but I think the spirit of what's expressed in this precept has something to do with not causing a schism in the Dharma, for example, or disputes, in the Sangha. Um, and I think that's really the basis of that is about competition. It's about trying to separate people and separate oneself because of the kind of will to power, or wanting to be better than others, or there's some reason that we're competing with others or with ourselves even. But this this made me uh, think of the story of Devadatta, which many of us may know about. He was, the cousin and the brother-in-law, I believe, of the Buddha. And we don't really know how much of what we read in the early text is factual, but that's not necessarily the most important point. But so a lot of the things we might talk about are kind of legendary, but still it's an interesting story to examine. So it says that Devadatta, well, first of all, if we're not familiar with him, we might just say that he's kind of the infamous anti-Buddha. He's the guy who wanted to break up the Sangha and have his own community. And it said that at some point he tried to kill the Buddha. There was plot to take him out so that he could take over the Sangha. So, but it says that according to the text, at first he was a good monk. He was very strident and he practiced very diligently, and it says that he attained supernatural powers. So this is might be the problem, is that at some point he got so good at his yogic practice that he gained, psychic powers, and he was able to transform his body. And as I say, we don't have to take this literally, but there's something to learn, I think, from even the metaphor in this. So it's said that when he got to this level, he started feeling desire for power and for fame because he thought he was better than other monks, or he thought that somehow he was cooler than other people. And he ended up going to the king, Ajata Shastru, this king who at the time was ruler over Magadha, I think it was. So he said that he went to this king and impressed him very much because he was able to transform his body into the body of a young boy clothed in snakes. And this very much impressed the king. And the king says, "Hey, come and be my teacher." And it turns out that together they kind of went down this dark road. And the king uh, planned to kill his father, King Bimbisara, which he did kill later after he had taken over the throne, but history says that this king did kill his father, King Bimbisara, who was a friend and benefactor of Shakyamuni. And Devadatta planned at this time with the king to take over the Buddha's Sangha, because Devadatta went to the Buddha and said, I think these kind of things are out of place in the Sangha. Would you please change them? He wanted certain practices to be different than what they were. The Buddha refused. He said, "No, those are too strict. We're okay with what we're doing." And it says that Devadatta actually tried to get the Buddha to assign him as the next leader of the Sangha as well, and the Buddha refused, to do that. So I think it's a kind of a different point, but the Shakyamuni, when he left, he didn't want there to be another kind of um, supreme ruler, of the Sangha. He didn't want to make it into kind of, one person community. He wanted it to be more of a communal practice. So anyway, it doesn't matter what happened to Devadatta so much after this. It says that he at some point realized his error, and of course he wasn't able to kill the Buddha, but he realized his error and repented at some point, but was about to go and try to make amends with the Buddha, and the earth opened up and swallowed him, and he went down into Buddhist hell. So I think it's a story about just he kind of waited too long. It was too late for him to kind of undo the damage. He'd done so much damage that it was too late for him to undo his karma. So we don't have to take this literally as a person going into another realm. But I think it speaks to one thing, a leader that people follow according to their karmic ability, their charisma, or their kind of intellectual knowledge, or somehow something beyond the realization of the Dharma. So the thing that was most important to Devadatta was his own ego, it seems. And so there's a kind of danger in getting distracted from our true teacher, which, in my teacher taught me that our true teacher is Zazen. That's our only true teacher, our own life. and our own reality as it's expressed in practice. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. But when we get sort of distracted or dazzled by someone's charisma or their personality, and we base our practice on following one person rather than the Dharma, that is being expressed, it's a problem. And that happens within our practice too. For Devadatta, he um, forgot or went out of the path of Zazen or his practice being his true teacher. He let his own desire or his own ego become his own true teacher, and it can be a sneaky thing that happens, um, little by little without our understanding. And so it's one of the reasons that Dogen Zenji emphasized so much to avoid seeking after fame and profit. It's over and over again. We read this in Dogen Zenji's teachings that if we go astray and start wanting to feel like we're a big shot in the Sangha, or we want to make more money as a product of the Dharma, somehow make the Dharma into a commodity, that we can be pretty sure we're straying, way away from the way away from the way. Uh, so the next I'll talk about the early Pali text, the Sutta Nipata. This is another source, I think, of really a deep root of where this um, precept originates. So in the Sutta Nipata, and I often quote this, it says, the Muni or the awakened one, the sage or the awakened one, does not speak of himself as among equals, inferiors, or superiors, peaceful and without miserliness. He does not take, he does not reject. So this part struck me the last time I read it. He does not take and he does not reject. That's really what we do in our Zen practice. You know, we don't grasp things and we don't reject them. But I'll read the next quote here. Nor should one construct any view in the world by means of knowledge or good behavior and observances. One should not take oneself as equal or think of oneself as inferior or superior. So I really love these quotes. So here's another one. I love when he says this about not comparing oneself. So this is Shakyamuni, and this is the early text we think that is the real historical Buddha's voice, be in this very early text. So he who thinks himself equal, inferior, or superior to others, by that very reason enters disputation. If you think you're inferior, superior, or equal, that's the root of arguments and having defend your point of view. Um, but there are not such thoughts as equal, inferior, or superior to him who is unmoved by these three measurements, by these measurements of the mind, a relative kind of conceptual measurement. So when we think of ourselves, when we compare ourselves to others, that's what we're doing. We're using this kind of conceptual, fabricated measurement of our worth compared to somebody else's worth. And usually when we read this, we think, oh, well, okay, we're equal. Everyone is created equal. And that's the real difference in Buddhist teaching is equal is another comparison. And so what we're saying is we don't see other. When we see others, we see the self. So everything we encounter is self. So anytime we're setting up some kind of comparison, we're you know, doing this kind of conceptual measurement, which is beyond the reality that we're talking about as a bodhisattva practicing with our precepts. So, when we argue with somebody, what is our motivation? What really, when there's an argument, we think, we're right and someone else is wrong. Usually it has to do with not feeling um, worse than someone else or feeling better than someone else or wanting someone else to regard us as okay or smart or uh, better. So I really love the part about, this kind of measurement there, that is the root of disputes. When we measure our worth against someone else, um, we're almost bound to go into dispute with them sooner or later. So next we can go and that's just a really short uh, delving into the early text. But the next one we often talk about would be Bodhidharma's one mind precepts. So these are attributed to, the first ancestor in Zen, of course, who supposedly brought Zen from India to China in like the 6th century. And this his precepts always kind of emphasize this universal reality, that I was talking about, this unity of our life, this aspect of unity. So Bodhidharma said, self nature is wondrous and imperceptible within the non discriminating Dharma. Not distinguishing oneself from others is called the precept of not praising oneself nor slandering others. So this, is going back to the source. But what I really love about this is, when I see this deep connection between what Shakyamuni taught in the Pali Canon and our Bodhisattva precepts, it makes me happy because some people think, we say Mahayana Buddhism just kind of went in its own way. But we understand our interpretation is that we really try to get to the essence of what Shakyamuni was teaching, really his fundamental um, way of expressing the Dharma. And I think we see that here, not saying that we're equal, inferior, or superior to someone else is another way of saying within the non discriminating Dharma, not distinguishing oneself from others is called the precept of not praising oneself nor slandering others. So the way that Dogen Zenji talked about this often was, actually Uchan Roshi, I think, is the one who actually expressed Dogen's teaching this way, that everything I encounter is my life. Everything I encounter is self. So we can say everything I encounter is beyond self or non-self, but saying everything is self is a way of expressing this Dharma. So when I criticize and judge people that I encounter, I'm just seeing a mirror of my own mind. I'm not really seeing uh, somebody who's inferior or superior or equal to me. I'm seeing my own mind and my own biases. So we can be pretty certain, I think, when we criticize someone else, that there's some underlying discomfort within our own self. Even when it's very justified, if we judge someone and we think that we're better, equal, or superior, um, we're making a judgment based on this conceptual realm. That's kind of it's a necessary tool, but when we believe in it at its core, it's a problem. We can't judge someone else as good or bad. We can't. We're not God. We're not somebody who can say whether someone is worthy or unworthy. Um, So there's really a kind of clinging to oneself when we speak in this way. So we need to discern whether someone is exhibiting wholesome activity and say, well, actually, I don't want to engage in that person's unwholesome activity or promote it or accept it possibly. But when we say that person is no good, that's a problem because we're seeing ourselves, we're seeing all beings. Um, So the other side of the coin is that when we praise others and disparage ourselves, it's another. way of doing this. That's kind of one thing this precept doesn't say explicitly, but it implies it for sure. So when we say everyone's better than me, I'm no good, we're also clinging to this conceptual comparison and separating ourselves, from others. Um, so I'd like to, I mean, study sometimes the way we speak, that this kind of uh, measuring is embedded in our speech. And so I would bring this up. This is something else that somebody said to me some time ago, and I don't really know what they were communicating. So I'm trying to imagine if this were me saying this to somebody else, what I would be saying. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know, what really the person was saying, but so it was about a talk that I gave a while back, and they said, "I'm sorry for dropping out. I was irritated with your lack of technical ability and the mistakes you made in this translation of this text. I'm too judgmental and conceited. Thank you for providing practice support." So I don't mean to, the person I don't think will ever hear this. So I thought this was just kind of an interesting way to study what I would be saying to myself if I actually said this to someone else. And when I say I'm too judgmental and conceited, I think if I said that, I would be saying I'm sorry, I'm so knowledgeable that I had to leave because I was more knowledgeable than you in this instance. Or um, thank you for providing practice, support. Is it really sincere? I had to leave because this was so irritating, but I had to leave you. Thank you for providing support. So um, I think sometimes we don't, either we know or we don't know what the way we use language, what we're actually communicating, with to ourselves or to others. So even when we praise someone else sometimes, or when we criticize ourselves, we're really, doing the opposite. We're setting up this kind of uh, dichotomy that separates us, from others. So sometimes we see this in the Zendo. Sometimes we see this with the Zen forms. These Zen forms are meant to be a way a way to connect us or express our Zazen practice. They're a way for us to express this universal reality together as a community. But if when we start thinking about how beautiful we look when we do them, or how somehow we know this and that person doesn't, um, we need to take a look at what we're expressing. We really need to take a step back, because that is not that's not what this is about. Now, sometimes we may go to another person and say, uh, "I can give you some advice here and tell you how this is done," but we never, this is all of us have done this or had this given to us. We all have to have corrections, or we all have to have advice from someone else who has more experience, and we take that with gratitude and as a way of supporting each other in practice. But we don't approach it as a way of criticizing or comparing ourselves, to others. So how often do we do this in our own mind? We see somebody and we criticize them or judge them by the way they look or the color of their skin or how they speak, without even registering it, without even having uh, the conscious recognition of it come up in our mind. So that's part of the reason that we talk about mindfulness, for example. It's a very much overused term, but this is a way of studying our our karmic tendencies off the cushion so that we can engage each other as practice, as reality, as the self, as practice, rather than be, taken away by our karmic tendencies, just taken away by our biases. So, often there's a story instantly created in our mind when we see somebody or when we encounter someone with this kind of judging. So we don't have to say it, but often we do compare ourselves. We think our culture is better than theirs, or we think theirs is better than ours, whatever the case might be. And this comes up without even our conscious knowledge of it. And I think that's what this, precept is about, partially. So, Beaumont. And so I'll go a little bit over. I think it's okay to go over a little bit, right? We just kind of go over here and there. And I think, do we need to stop right on time, or can I usually we go over a little bit. That's I'm long-winded, so everybody's probably ready for it by now. That's heard me talk before. But so the seventh major precept, according to the Beaumont or the Brahmanet Sutra. So this is an interesting one. This is the really where the Bodhisattva vow is emphasized. A disciple of the Buddha shall not praise himself and speak ill of others or encourage others to do so. He must not create the causes, conditions, methods, or karma of praising himself and disparaging others. So, and I apologize for the kind of gender bias here. This is an old text, and we know this means him, he, she, her, them, I think. So I apologize for this old translation. As a disciple of the Buddha, the person should not be willing to stand in for all, the person should be willing to stand in for all sentient beings and endure humiliation and slander, accepting blame and letting sentient beings have all the glory. If instead they display their own virtues and conceits and conceal the good points of others, thus causing them to suffer slander, they commit a parajika offense. So this sounds a little extreme, when we think about it or when we hear it. And I started thinking about what does this really, mean? And I don't think the Bodhisattva way is really about making me small and others better. But usually the tendency is that we do it, the opposite way. But sometimes we need to just step back and take a shot, even though it may not be our fault. You know, why do we get so riled up if somebody sees a mistake that we didn't make and attributes it to us? Why do we get so riled up when that happens? Why is it so difficult? And I think that's what they're talking about here, because in the end, this no one person does anything by themselves. So there's a quote by Sawaki Roshi here. Let's see, where is it? Oh, so I know I wrote it down somewhere, but he basically is famous for saying, a person who built a a building. There's a businessman who built this building. He's at the top of the company and he built this building. Maybe he put his name on the top and he said, I built this building. But that person has never held a wrench in his hand, never carried a piece of concrete, never, um, probably, maybe never even designed a building. And yet he says, I built that building. And so that's really the same when we do anything. When I'm giving this talk, if I feel, somehow like I have something extra because I have some knowledge, it's kind of silly. Like I've read this in another text or someone's taught me, or I've been practicing what's been handed down to me. There's no way I can say that I'm proud of some teaching or something that I'm doing in service of the Dharma. And yet, of course, if I don't take responsibility, it's a big problem. So there's the two aspects of it here. Um, you know, in my mind now, all of you are conditioning me. This person that is arising now and speaking is conditioned by all of you. That's our universal self, or that's the universal aspect of our connection right now. So this talk I wouldn't be giving if it weren't for you, and I would probably be speaking in a different way if different people were here, or different people were responding in a different way. But this feeling of self that I have arising in my mind and body right now is you. You know, you are me arising now. And yet, if I don't take responsibility for my words, um, also the Dharma isn't, expressed. So there's the individual part that I need to take care of, but it's completely dependent on you. And actually the people that are watching on Zoom, this technology and the person who developed this software, the people who developed it, the people who built this building, and the air that's we're breathing now and the sunshine, all is expressing itself now as this talk for me. And so to say that I'm giving this talk is kind of a fiction in a way, but a necessary fiction, because the talk doesn't get given if we don't, go with it and say we need to say something about the Dharma, you know. So that's another way that we praise ourselves and we disparage others when we say, I do this and I'm so great. Um, okay, let's see. Uh, Find me a page here so I can finish up. So the other reason, though, this is kind of a koan. Of course, when we say that I did something, or I say that I'm good at something, we don't think about the fact that we're implying that we're better than somebody else. It's inherent in the way that we speak. So I'm good at this, and there's an inherent comparison. So I'm better than someone else. But at the same time, we need to measure our strengths and weaknesses in order to better express the Dharma. If we just say, I'm no good at anything, or we don't take any measurement, there's no way to express the Dharma. So the kind of koan is, how do I examine my strengths and weaknesses without clinging to them as mine, but use them in the service, of of this universal reality as a bodhisattva. So, as I said, each one of these precepts are kind of a koan, because if we say, I'm good at this, ain't I great? I built this building, it's really way off. But if we don't take any measure of what our strengths are, and express our individuality, uh, and see what we have to offer uniquely with this body and mind, we're not expressing our vow. So it's the kind of koan that we need to meet with this precept. So I'll go on to one other thing I wanted to point out too. I think I said it before, but this goes along with I'm a good person. When we say I'm a good person or she's a good person, we think that's a nice thing to say, but it's really kind of aggressive when we think about it, and it causes a kind of separation. Of course, we know when we say I'm a bad person, they're a bad person. We know that's pretty, much not so nice. But even when we say someone's good, we're creating this kind of measurement and this kind of separation. So we need to be careful in practicing with our speech in this way. So Dogen Zenji's uh, comment on this precept: not praising oneself nor slandering others. Buddhas and ancestors attained verification with the whole sky and the great earth. When the great body is manifested, they verify inside empty space. When the Dharma body is manifested, there is no inch of ground on earth. So, we could talk about that for another few hours with what he's saying, but we won't. Don't worry. Uh, but just a few things to point out about what I think he's pointing towards. This empty space means it goes back to apparently a Abhidharma term that means, it's one of the unconditioned dharmas, empty space. It means everything that contains everything. So it doesn't mean the space between you and I, but it was thought that there's just the space of the universe in which things come and go. So he's using this, I think, as a metaphor for the entirety of this universe where there's coming and going. We come and go, things come and go, and yet there's some thing that is always nothing is added or gained, nothing is gained or lost within this empty space. Um, and this no inch of ground, I think he's talking about no self or other, no way to measure, no way to measure me, you, distance, or time, or there's no way to say I'm equal, superior, or inferior. In this realm, no conceptual reality. We have these conceptual measurements, but they're a fiction. They're something we use in order to express this dharma. So, and that's related to the great body. So the great body we talked about, Shobogenzo Makahanya Haramitsu a few months ago. We were talking about that, and this great body is often he's referring to Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva, which is a sort of a metaphor for this universe, this Bodhisattva that is all hands and eyes in this koan that he quotes in Makahanya Haramitsu. So all hands and eyes, you know. Esoteric Buddhism, this is a bodhisattva with in 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. And that means compassion. So we have to see the differences between others in order to have the hands to help them. And yet we don't, we're all part of the same body. So our eyes don't get jealous and compare themselves to the hand, or our foot doesn't compare itself to the ear and say, I'm better than you, but we're functioning together. And for the entire body to be healthy, the hands help the feet, help the eyes, or they don't even think about it, their separation. They function as one body, and yet they're separate. So my teacher used to always talk about five fingers in a hand. We can look at this reality as a hand, this universal reality, or we can look at it as five fingers. And so each finger has its function and its place. And if we lose one of the fingers, the function of the hand is changed deeply. But you can't exchange a pinky and a thumb. You can't put one in the other place, and it's not going to function the same way. The thumb is a very kind of special finger, but so is the pinky, to function as a hand. And yet, so it's one hand completely. We just say this is a hand, or we can say it's a collection of five fingers that function together. So that I think that's what he's saying with this: when the great body is manifest, um, all hands and eyes working together as one to express the compassion of interconnection. So, in other words, when we see others, we need to use this kind of measuring in order to express our unity, which seems like a contradiction. So we need to, but actually, that's exactly what Nagarjuna said. We don't express this universal reality is not approached without the relative. That means we express this universal reality by what we do and how we encounter and embrace each other here and now. So we have to use this comparison, but we don't cling to it. We don't see it's real. Um, all right. So I think that's all I'll say today for now. And um, at this point, we take some questions, or we stop and we close the sutra and then we ask some questions. Okay. Universally to all, so that we together with all being realize the Sorry, we didn't give you time to close